Today on the podcast, we are still considering the question how to close the deal. In the previous recordings, let's say maybe 3 or 4 before now, we looked into whether, in summary, we looked at the differences between simple and complex sales scenarios and the implications for how we should approach the sale. And I hope I've been able to convince you guys so far, for those of you who've been listening for a while, that if you are in a simple sales scenario, then it's okay to go around pushing your product and talking about the features and the benefits, and you will be just fine. But if you're dealing with much more complex scenarios like those of us in the wedding and the event space, particularly the planners, photographers, and decor people, or maybe you sell insurance or some other commercial product or accounting or medical services, then you ought to take a much more consultative approach. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I'd like to say thank you and welcome, because you are listening to, well, in my own opinion, until I'm told to the contrary and someone shows me the facts, the figures. You're listening to what I think is Nigeria's most longest running business podcast, because when we hit March in 2022, would have been doing this for about 2 years, and I think we're over 250 episodes right now. So I think this is the longest running business podcast, Nigerian business podcast so far. There are other people, of course, who are out there, but they only gave it a good run, 4 episodes, 5, 10, 20. None have been going for as long as I have. I'm still keeping an eye out there. I'm still looking. And so if you do come across any good, valuable, interesting Nigerian business podcasts, so if you do, dear gentle listener, please let me know. Send it to me. I'd like to have a listen, because by all means, I'd like to share as many good resources as possible and put them out there so that we can all grow, we can all learn, and we can all evolve. Anyway, yeah, so that's it. That's the advertisement for those of you who are joining, who are first time listeners. So if you're a first time listener and all of this sounds like Greek, the whole thing about simple versus complex sales scenarios and product pushing versus being consultative, then all you have to do is, once you're done listening to this podcast, just skip back to the menu, scroll down, pay attention to the subject headings, and you will find the relevant podcast episode that will delve into all of these things in much more detail. If you are interested in these series of conversations, then just pay attention to the hashtag, the numerical sequence. Hashtag 1234, how to close the deals in ... and you should be able to get pretty much up to speed on where we are today. So, on the last episode, we looked at the differences between consultative versus product selling, and why it's important for those of us who are in complex sales scenarios to be much more consultative. And we went over the idea of consultative selling being a question-based approach. So you're not there to wow people with how beautiful your product or service is, or how eloquent you are, or how good looking you are. But you're there to ask questions because you're trying to get to the root of a problem that they have, or a need, or a vision that they're trying to achieve. And it's only when you have asked all the relevant questions that you'll be able to tie in what it is that your product or your service does and how that helps them solve the problem or achieve that ideal need. So if you're the wedding decor person, for instance, you don't just come and say, I have the latest and the greatest Egyptian cotton, and that's what we're going to use for your drapings and your tables and everything else. Well, you need to ask them relevant questions to find out what their ideal vision for the wedding is. And if they want it to be classy and sophisticated and cosmopolitan and all that, it's only then that you can bring in all those things about Egyptian cotton or Italian lace or whatever it is that you decor people use to seal the deal. So be consultative and ask the questions first. So that's the first half of the question on how to close the deal. So is closing a deal Is it different according to what scenario that you're in? And I hope I've been able to convince you guys that yes, there is a difference. So now the second half of the question, and that is, what does closing mean? Because before you close the deal in real estate or in weddings or whatever it is that you do, you have to have a firm idea of what closing actually means. Now, in the training session for Kairos Real Estate, it became clear, and I was hoping that it would, or rather, I was glad that people would get the distinction. So it became clear that for members of the class, there are people there who had this idea that closing means you're going in for the kill and you want them to make that huge deposit. So in real estate circles, of course, housing, land, real estate is expensive. So pretty much closing is when you ask them to pay that 40 million, 400 million, whatever it is that is the asking price. And there was a minority in the class who assumed that closing isn't just the big ask at the end, but all the minor asks that you go through in the whole process from the beginning to the end. Now, if you've been listening for any length of time, you'll remember that I have said when it comes to sales and improving your sales that there is no such thing as a right or wrong answer. You only have the most appropriate answer and the least appropriate answer depending on the context. So both answers, in a sense, are right. If you look at traditional sales theory, especially the work of Tom Hopkins, who also happens to be a real estate expert, or rather his starting off point was in real estate. So in traditional sales theory, we distinguish between one call closing and one time closing. It sounds similar, so let me go over it again. We distinguish between one call closing and one time closing. Now, the idea behind one time closing, that's the one that everybody knows. That's the big ask. For those of you who are guys who are listening to the podcast who are smooth with the ladies, the one time ask is that big, will you marry me? And then the one call closing is the smaller asks that you get, all the commitments that you get at every single stage that lead up to the big close. So those are the small things like, what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? Or what's your name? Or how often do you come here? Do you study law or do you study accounting? Or, the small questions. Anyway, so enough of the relationship thing, and let's situate that in a business context. So the one-time close would be you showing up and thinking that you are going to be able to get them to buy that house from you right now, even though this is the first time you're meeting them, and you thinking that you're going to be able to get them to pay whatever it is that is your asking price to be their wedding photographer or their wedding planner. That is the one-time close, the big close. Now, the one call close, the idea behind the one call close is this, that before you get to the big ask, you're going to have to call on them multiple times. So sometimes you're going to go over to the house, sometimes you make a phone call, sometimes you'll send an email, other times it might be a WhatsApp message or an SMS. Now the idea is that at each call or at each interaction, you're going to have a small commitment or a small goalpost that you're trying to move them through. And the whole idea is that if you're able to make one significant small close after another, then the huge close should be pretty much a done deal if you've done your work properly. And so that is the way that I think we ought to look at it when it comes to closing, that you can either be a one-time closer, that's the big ask, or a one-call closer. Now, this is what I'm going to say, not just from personal experience, but from some studies that have been put out there. One-time closing is a possibility, and there are people who do that, who show up, this is the first time, and they're going to walk away with a big check. Now, that is really hard, and, for that, you have to be really polished, what else? Sophisticated. Some people even say you have to be a scammer or a hoodwinker. You don't really care about folks. Let's see, what else? It requires that's a different playing field and it's too much work. It's easier to be a one call closer and to take things through one increment at a time. In fact, if you read some old sales literature from what's his name? Neil Rackham, I think it was called Spin Selling. There's a book from the 70s or maybe the 80s. So Neil Rackham has this idea that successful salespeople are people who can tell the difference between continuations and advancements. Now, this is the difference. A continuation is what happens when you're with a potential customer. You guys are getting along pretty well, and you guys like the same shows. You like the same this, the same that. You have the same political views. You went to the same school, and it looks like you guys are friends. Um, but at the end of the day, at each call or email or visit, you don't really make any progress. Now, this is one of those situations that some of us in the wedding space are familiar with. You meet the bride and the groom, you guys seem to be getting along very well, you guys are best friends, but for some reason, they go with someone else. That's when you're stuck in lots of cycles of continuations because you guys are just continuing in love and being happy and everything, but you're not making any progress. Advancements, on the other hand, are when you meet every single time and you guys take some concrete steps towards the goal. So, whether you guys get along personally very well or not, the idea with an advancement is that each time you meet, concrete steps are taken. You guys leave the meeting or you leave the conversation having an idea of what the next step is going to be towards closing the sale. So Neil Rackham has this idea that to be really good at sales, you need to realize that there's a difference between continuations and advancements, and you need to be making sure that you are advancing at every single step of the interaction. So, for instance, those of us in the wedding space, especially those of us who are brave enough to do what are they called? Wedding shows and wedding expos. Earlier in the podcast, maybe in the first 5 or maybe 10 episodes, I spoke about my love for wedding shows, and I really think it's something that we all should get engaged in. Even if you don't close any deals, it's good practice interacting with customers one on one. So it's a good practice for learning how to talk to strangers in a business context. So if we show up, if they show up to the booth and we have that conversation with them, and oh, you went to the same uni, we like the same movies, blah blah blah, I'll call you next week, you call them next week, you guys have a good chat, you talk about Big Brother, you talk about everything, and then after that 20-minute conversation, you call them again next week, and it's the same old thing. You're stuck in that loop where, like, oh, this is a cool photographer, oh, this is a cool couple, but you guys are not making any concrete steps. Those are all continuations. Now, if you're going to have a mindset of taking things through advancements, it's going to be they come over to the booth, you do the chat, you establish rapport, or you went to the same university, all of that. You get all that nice stuff out of the way, but then you have at the back of your mind that the next step is going to be trying to get them to come to your studio or your office, or you come over to their office so that you can start discussing specific ideas. So in that case, what you have then is an advancement, because not only did you have an idea of what the next step is supposed to be, you were able to get them to commit to that next step. That, okay, you've come here, we've had such a good time, I think I have an okay idea of what it is that you guys are trying to achieve, and I suspect that I should be able to help you achieve that if you guys select me to be your wedding planner. So how about you come over to my office on Tuesday at 9 a.m. or I come over to your office on Tuesday, 1 p.m. at your lunch break, whatever. Use your own verbiage, basically. So you make that proposal, and that is something concrete, and everybody has a clear idea that, okay, we all love each other and we seem to be getting along pretty well, but the next step forward is going to be a meeting at your office or excuse me, at my office, so that we can start discussing specific concrete ideas about what we're going to achieve at your wedding. And so that's pretty much the idea behind continuations and advancements, and between one call closing and one time closing. So you can see that in the latter scenario, what we're doing is one call closings. So at the wedding expo, we have one idea, one goal. Find out if these people are worth talking to, if we're fit for each other, and the next step is to line up the meeting. So at the meeting, you're going to have some more goals. Maybe get some more information and secure another meeting for a presentation. And then at the presentation, by the time you're done, I think the possible next step at that meeting could be to get an agreement in principle that we are all on the same page and that there are no objections, and then on and on and on. So you're moving things forward one step at a time. And so, in my own opinion, this is the more effective or the more ideal way to close the deal, or rather, this is a better definition of closing that all of us should adopt. Of course, if you're looking for a magic bullet, there are lots of people over on Instagram and Twitter and Google who will teach you those magic one-time closes. Say this to get people to close the deal and double your sales by 500% in half the time, and blah blah blah. So there are people out there who are selling magic formulas, and if that's what you're looking for, then by all means stop listening to this podcast and run along to those people so you can get the magic closing secret, so that you can triple your sales by 1,500% in 2 hours or whatever. But if you're not looking for that sort of thing, then let's take things nice and slow. Let's take it easy. And what we're going to focus on is on one call closing. We're going to move things forward one step at a time. It's about making advancements, not spinning around in one place, and not making any movements, just making continuations. So with that, okay, I'll have to bring it to a close here because we're getting close to the 20-minute mark. The last two episodes have gone on rather long, and so so that's it. Those are the different perspectives on what closing means. So at the next recording, we will move on to how to figure out if you have a deal. After that, we're going to look at CRM and how we can use that to advance the deal, assuming that you guys are on the same page with me when it comes to continuations and advancements. And then we'll answer the ultimate question of how do you close the deal. And then what else? Okay, we'll also look at some case scenarios that I went over with the folks at Kairos Real Estate. If you are new to the podcast, the material that we're going over right now is part of a session that I delivered with Kairos Real Estate, which is a real estate firm over here in Abuja. And they had me in to speak with their sales team, the sales executives. That's the people who handle face-to-face conversations and the people who man the phones, about how they could be much more effective in closing the deal in real estate. So thank you very much, guys, for listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast. I'm your host, Abuja-based sales consultant and event media professional, Tavishima Ayede. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll catch you guys at the next recording.